What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Lexi. I will put my Instagram handle up above so we can connect there. But in today's video, I am going to actually be talking about a requested topic, and I think this is going to be a very helpful video for a lot of you guys out there watching, and it will apply to probably everybody who watches my channel. But I got asked specifically on my Instagram, because every once in a while I'll ask you guys in my story, like, what do you want to see? What are some topics you want me to cover? And somebody specifically asked me to talk about how to build muscle and kind of walking through that process. And I wanted to make a video where I pretty much break down everything you need in order to optimally put on muscle. So I'm gonna, make this basic and as basic and simple as I can, but I'm gonna break it down into food, your nutrition, so the nutrition side of things, the training side of things, the cardio side of things, the rest and recovery side of things, the supplement side of things, and then I'm also at the end gonna go over a couple questions that some of you specifically asked me about this topic on my Instagram. So first off, let's talk about, like I said, I'm gonna break it down into different sections as far as what you need to be doing in order to put on muscle. So the first thing I'm gonna touch on is going to be food/nutrition. In my personal opinion, that is the most important, besides training, piece of putting on muscle. I see a lot of athletes, specifically a lot of bodybuilders, afraid to eat food. And at the end of the day, if you're not eating at your maintenance or in a slight surplus, you're not likely going to be optimizing muscle growth and putting on muscle. Now, some of you guys may be asking, Lexi, is it possible to be in a calorie deficit and to build muscle? And I usually say it's very, very rare. You're typically only going to see this with people who just started lifting weights for the first time in their life. Now, for people like me, for probably a lot of you guys watching, if you've been, lifting weights consistently for a year plus, it's very unlikely that you're going to actually be able to put on substantial muscle while eating in a calorie deficit. So that's first and foremost. You have to make sure you're eating enough. You have to make sure you're either eating at a calorie maintenance or a slight surplus. Now, can you build muscle in maintenance? Yes, you can. Is it going to be a slower rate at, compared to how much muscle you would put on if you were eating at a calorie surplus? Absolutely, but you can put on muscle both ways. So just to give you guys a general breakdown, because I know I will get the question of, well, Lexi, okay, so if I'm eating at my maintenance or if I'm eating at a slight calorie surplus, what should my macros be? What should my macros, meaning protein, carbs, and fat, be? How should I structure those, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're getting in all of your calories from just carbs compared to if you're getting in all of your calories from a split of protein, carbs, and fat, the body is going to obviously put on muscle a little bit differently with that. So general rule of thumb is for protein, I generally like to say set your protein goal in grams with what your goal, your target body weight is, right? So I will say I have a smaller frame, but I eat around 135 grams of protein, which is significantly more than my body weight, but it works for me. But if I had, let's say, a female who was 130 pounds, I would probably set her protein around that amount, give or take a little bit of leeway there. So set your protein goal around what maybe your goal weight is. Obviously, if you have a smaller frame like me, you can probably set it a little bit higher than what your goal weight is if you're okay with that. Now, when it comes to fat, I specifically don't like to get below 20 to 25% of my calories below fat. So I always like to make sure I am maintaining at least 20% minimum of my total calories. They should be coming from fat. I just don't like to drop below that. So then, of course, if you do the math, you set your protein, then you set your fat, I would use the remainder of your calories left over and allocate those to carbs. Carbs are going to be very important along with protein and along with fat even for building muscle, right? So that's why, not only tracking your calories, but furthermore tracking your macronutrients, your protein, your carbs, and your fat is going to be extremely important if you want to put on lean body mass and you want to put on muscle. Like I said, the single-handedly biggest mistake I see people, especially bodybuilders, making, specifically female bodybuilders making when it comes to putting on muscle, is they're just afraid to eat. And, you know, I always say, if you're afraid to eat, if you're, you know, if you can't look at food as fuel, it's going to be very hard for your body to actually build, right? To build muscle. So nutrition is going to be the first foundation of building muscle. So that is number one. Now let's talk about number two, training. So again, a very, very important aspect of building muscle. How should your training look? How many times per week should you be training? What should your workouts look like? All of that. So I usually say that, you know, believe me, I came from a background where I did a lot of boot camps. I did a lot of high intensity workout classes, but specifically when we're talking about building optimal muscle, I'm not a huge advocate of, you know, those like classes that incorporate cardio in with weights. Those are great if you're just wanting to kind of maintain the muscle that you have, but if you're wanting to put on substantial muscle, really splitting up your weight training and your cardio is going to be important. So typically I recommend, when it comes to, you know, a muscle building split, so to say, training around, you know, 4 to 5 times per week. Some people can train 6 times per week, but I'm gonna talk in a second about why I don't love that specifically for a muscle building phase. But I would say around a give or take a 5-day weight training split where you are focusing on weights separately from your cardio. That may look like, you know, 60 minutes in a body part split 5 days out of the week. But specifically when we're talking training in order to put on optimal muscle, I'm a big advocate for splitting up your weight training and your cardio, and not incorporating both, and not doing, you know, a ton of supersets or drop sets or cardio while you're quote unquote resting from one of your, you know, weight training exercises. So that's how I like to look at training. Now, I want to caveat on that and also talk about recovery. So we've touched on nutrition, training, and, you know, I can't go into too much detail when it comes to training, as far as it's going to be independent upon people. So that's why I didn't go too into depth. But like I said, generally, I would stick with about a 4 to 5 day weight training split, probably 5 for most seasoned athletes. A 5-day weight training split, about an hour for each workout, and, you know, splitting it up based off of what you need to really build. Now, as far as recovery goes, so this is going back to why I said I'm not a huge advocate for 6-day training splits, specifically for somebody who is in a muscle building phase. And it is because rest and recovery is so important when it comes to building muscle. It sounds very counterintuitive, but resting and recovering is what is going to facilitate that muscle growth. So if you are somebody who is chronically overtraining and never giving your body a chance to actually rest and recover, your muscles are not going to grow. When you go into the gym, what's happening physiologically is you are breaking down your muscle fibers. And then when you're resting and recovering, you're building them back up stronger, right? That is where they grow. So I find personally, as a coach, as an athlete, that it is very hard for somebody to grow optimal muscle if they are training with full intent 6 days a week. It just doesn't always allow for enough recovery. But that's another factor I wanted to talk about, is rest and recovery. And not just through rest days, but if you are, you know, for example, if you're a bodybuilder, if you're like me and you're really trying to optimize and put on muscle, I think it's very important not only to take your rest days with intention, but to get scheduled, you know, body work if you can, whether that be a massage or seeing a chiropractor, or, you know, maybe you're just being extra cautious and you're foam rolling and you're stretching a lot to really help to repair and to recover those muscles as much as possible. So that is another big piece of the equation when it comes to building muscle. So thus far, we've talked about nutrition, we've talked about training, we've talked about rest and recovery, and now I'm going to talk about cardio. So when it comes to cardio, again, this is one of those variables that I can't tell you there's a quote unquote perfect amount of cardio that everybody should be doing in their muscle building phase, because there isn't. It's going to be very person dependent. However, the general theme that I want to kind of relay to you guys is that your cardio in a muscle building phase should not be overkill. It shouldn't be overkill. And overkill is going to mean something different to everybody, right? I've known some people in their muscle building phases that simply don't have any cardio. They just have a step goal, and that's fine. But I've also known some people, myself included, I keep a little bit of cardio in my muscle building phase. For reference, my cardio right now is at 5 sessions of 20 minutes per week. So it's nothing crazy. That's what works for me. I would say as a general rule of thumb, and please take this with a grain of salt, but I would say if you're really wanting to optimize the muscle that you're putting on, if you're doing more than like 30 minutes of cardio 6 days a week, that's probably going to be overkill. Now, specifically when we're talking about what type of cardio to do when you're really trying to optimize the muscle that you're putting on, I find that low impact cardio is very easy for the body to recover from. Now, I don't mind HIIT cardio, high intensity interval training, but I also think that if you are going to incorporate that, specifically if you are incorporating that while also trying to build muscle, you just have to be very conscious of recovery. I would personally not do HIIT more than twice a week, just because if you are doing true HIIT, it takes a toll on the body as far as recovery goes. So if you're doing more than 2 sessions per week, it may be a little bit hard for the body to actually recover, and that could inhibit muscle growth. So again, it's kind of, I can't really give a specific answer as far as like, this is the amount of cardio you should be doing. And I can't say that would apply to everybody, but personally, I'm doing about 5 sessions of 20 minutes. I generally like cardio, but that is kind of my floor right now for my muscle building phase. And I've been able to put on muscle by doing that amount. But the general rule of thumb is when you are trying to build muscle, you should not be giving more energy to cardio than you are the weights. You should be allocating, in my opinion, about 85% of your energy towards the weights, and that leftover 15% should be allocated to cardio. So in a muscle building phase, if you want to be smart, you should really be allocating the majority of your energy to the weights as opposed to cardio. So we've talked about cardio, training, nutrition, rest, and recovery. Now I want to touch a little bit on supplements. So supplements are one of those things I do think that sometimes people overthink. They think that supplements are the magic pill, the magic potion to putting on muscle, and they can definitely help, but they're not, you can't out-supplement a bad diet or a bad training regimen. You just can't. So I would say, general supplements such as a multivitamin, omega fatty acids, I'm a big advocate for keeping those in year-round. One supplement I did want to mention is creatine. I do feel like that is a supplement that could be very beneficial in a muscle building phase. Heck, it's beneficial any phase of a fitness journey, but it is one of the most highly researched and science-backed supplements out there. So I would highly recommend taking creatine, especially if you are looking for ways to optimize your muscle building phase. Creatine is one I wanted to mention. Simple supplements such as pre-workout, such as pump products, things that you may take before you work out. I always get questions of, are those necessary? Are those things you have to take? And simply, I'll put it in simple terms as far as if you take that stuff and you find that it helps you to have a better workout, keep taking it. However, don't feel like you have to take it because it's trendy or it's cool. If you've never taken pre-workout and your workouts are just fine, there is no need to start. But again, if you are somebody that takes that stuff and finds that it enhances your workouts, I would just continue to keep it in. So those are going to be your basic fundamentals for putting on muscle. Now, I want to get to some of the questions that you guys specifically asked me on my Instagram relating to this topic. So those are that's the last thing I'm going to touch on in this video. Some of those questions, so I will go ahead and get started with those. Okay, so the first question is, how long will it take to see gains when focusing on building? So this is going to be a highly dependent question. I will say if you are a new lifter, like meaning you just started lifting weights, typically the first year of weightlifting, you're going to put on muscle a lot quicker than most people. Whereas if you're an advanced lifter, if you've been doing this for years and years and years, the rate at which you put on muscle is going to be slower. That's just part of it. But I would say, oftentimes I tell my clients that building muscle can be hard. It can kind of be like watching grass grow or watching paint dry. It's not something that you're gonna see like, oh my gosh, night and day difference within a few weeks or even a month, right? It's that long-term growth. Like I will put my progression up here from, and this is over a year difference. As you can tell, it's very hard to tell. Like you obviously can see I've put on size, I've put on a little bit of body fat, but I put on muscle. But just point being, that's the accumulation of over a year of being in a muscle building phase. So it's going to be dependent upon everybody. And it's also going to be dependent about how aggressive you're being with your food specifically. So if you're somebody that's going to choose to eat at maintenance, the rate at which you put on muscle is going to be very slow compared to somebody who chooses to eat a little bit at a surplus. Genetics also comes into play here. I hate to say it, but there are some people out there that just genetically, it's in their blood. They put on muscle a lot easier than other people. So that's kind of my answer for that question. Kind of general, but it gives you some sort of idea. The next question is going to be, what should my weight progressions be in the gym on a weekly basis in order to put on muscle? So great question. So when it comes to training to put on muscle, you should be prioritizing weight training, and furthermore, you should be prioritizing progressive overload, which means, simply put, you're repeating the same workouts weekly. You're not changing them up, and you're repeating them weekly, and you're striving to lift a greater load on the majority of your movements each week. That's that progressive overload principle. That's how you stimulate the muscle in order to be able to put on that lean body mass, right? So as far as how much weight should you be adding, well, that's going to be dependent upon the exercise you're doing, right? So if you're doing bicep curls, well, that's a hard movement to sometimes progress in weight-wise. Whereas if you're doing something like deadlifts and you're working with more weight in total, it may be easier to add 10 pounds, every week. Whereas with bicep curls, adding 10 pounds every week, that's a lot, right? So it's going to be exercise dependent, but I say any increase matters, even if it's 2 pounds or if it's 10 pounds, like anything matters when it comes to weight progressions, but progressive overload is going to be key when it comes to building muscle. Okay, so next question is how to prevent overtraining. So that's a great question, and simply put, it's just going to go back to that principle of rest that I talked about. I would say generally what I find to work for most people is 5 days of pretty intense weight training with 2 rest days from the weights. If you find, I think it's very important to listen to your personal biofeedback. If you find that you're starting to just feel kind of overtrained, kind of inflamed, super sore, it may be time to just take a deload week. So actually that's something I got a question about, is how often should I take a deload week? So for those of you that aren't aware of what a deload week is, it's kind of a week where it's essentially just that you're deloading. So you're typically, how I do it is, and how I tell my clients to do it is, I'll tell them to continue their same workouts, however, to cut the weight they're working with in half. So you're kind of deloading, right? And it's a great strategy to use, especially if you're in a muscle building phase. I like to do it usually about every 6 weeks. So every 6th week of a training split, I'll touch base with my client and we'll likely do a deload week on that 7th week before starting a new training block. But that's something, if you feel like you've been training for consecutive week after week and all of a sudden you're just feeling kind of sore, out of the normal soreness, if you're feeling inflamed, if you're feeling like your quality of workouts has just gone down tremendously, it may be time for a deload week. So that's something I like to do with my clients. Now, as far as the last question that I want to address. So somebody asked me about muscle soreness and what to expect when it comes to muscle soreness. What is, normal? What is too much? So this is a great question. And I'm sure you guys have heard it before. Muscle soreness is not always an indication that you're working hard enough. I was guilty back in the day of thinking that if I wasn't sore, I hadn't worked hard enough, but that is not the case. In fact, typically what I see is anytime somebody starts a new training split, so a new set of workouts, you're likely going to be very sore the first week or two because your body is doing a set of exercises that it probably hasn't done in a while. So it's very sensitized to those movements. It's going to be sore the first week or two. However, if you find that you are just chronically sore all the time, beyond the first 2 weeks of your training split and you're just always sore, even though you're doing the same workouts, I would look into possibly adding in an extra rest day or doing something that helps your recovery a bit more. So extra foam rolling, Epsom salt baths, because at that point, if you're always chronically sore, it's probably your body's way of telling you that you're just not recovering enough. So that was the last question I wanted to address. I really hope that this video was helpful for some of you guys. I tried to cover everything the best I could, but also keep this video kind of simply put so it was easy to understand for anybody that watches this. But comment below if you enjoyed this style of video, and if you learned something new, give this video a thumbs up. It really helps with my channel. And as always, wherever you guys are at in the world, I hope you have a great rest of your day.